is the Folksy Friend, and on this channel I talk Tolkien lore. If you are interested in other kinds of stories, fairy tales, folk tales, legends, mythologies, please take a look at my channel, Folksy Tales. That channel has somehow exploded and I'm so grateful, especially if you watch me on both channels. I really appreciate it. Quick channel update, skip to that timestamp if you don't want to hear it. But I just wanted to say, as I get through the Silmarillion, it is getting more and more challenging to write these scripts. I am choosing to go to every other week now for my videos because I want to spend enough time really making sure that the scripts make sense. If you feel like I'm not including enough background or I'm including too much, it would mean the world to me if you would let me know. I want to improve as I go. So with all that being said, thank you so much. I will see you every other Tuesday for sure. Let's get into today's story. And we're doing two, which I put in the chapters below, but they are related. They make sense together. We have the founding of the city of Gondolin and the tragedy of the tale of Aredhel. So let's start with Gondolin. The city of Gondolin would be founded by the High King Fingolfin's second son. Fingolfin is the son of the first High King of the Noldor, who was murdered many years ago by the great evil Morgoth. And the Noldor are one of two groups of elves that currently live in the west of Middle-earth. The Noldor had actually grown up, practically, lived most of their lives in the blessed realm of Valinor, but stuff went down with Morgoth, including the killing of their king. And now they have returned, and they are in exile because they committed some grave sins on their journey back to Middle-earth. And that will come into play later too. I'll explain it a little more then. So essentially what you need to know is that Turgon is important. He is the second son of the High King. With that background, it happened that early in the days of being back in Middle-earth, Turgon went on a little bit of a friend trip, a road trip with his cousin Finrod, who is very important as well to the family. He and Finrod were just going down the river, Sirion, exploring the land, when they just happened to one day come across a beautiful area and go to sleep by the river. As they were sleeping, the Valar of Deep Waters, Ulmo, came to them. He put them in a kind of enchantment and gave them prophetic dreams that were full of this dark foreboding and told them that something terrible was going to happen. When they awoke from these dreams, didn't tell one another that they had the dream, so they're not on the same page, but they each had their own feelings that they needed to go out and create a safe place for themselves and their people. Finrod went out and did this on his own. He found a cave system with the help of the king of the Sindar, but Turgon did not want to go the typical Middle-earth elf route of building in caves. He wanted to build his city based off of his home in Valinor, the great city called Tirion upon the hill, Tuna. That was his childhood home. He was born and raised there, and that's what he wanted to recreate. But he wasn't able to find a defensible place that had this kind of setup. And so he returned back to Nevrast, the realm that he was ruling over and protecting. And he had a home by the sea called Vinyamar. It was there that he was again visited by Ulmo. This time, Ulmo told him straight up, I know where you need to go. I have the perfect place for you. And he described to Turgon how to get there. Following these instructions, Turgon left Nevrast and traveled northeast until he came to a great mountain range. When he got to the mountains, he continued to follow Ulmo's instructions, following a stream that cut out a kind of path. And this way Turgon found, and so came to the green plain amid the mountains, and saw the island hill that stood there of hard stone. In ancient days, Tolkien tells us, this area had been a lake, but now it was just an open space with gentle rolling fields, and at the center was a perfect hill. This was the ideal location for Turgon to build his city, and this was known as the Vale of Tumladin. hidden within the encircling mountains. With this location in mind, Turgon again returned to Vinyamar, and there he set about planning out a great city. Now, not too long after this, there was a battle, Dagor Agloreb. And after helping defeat the orcs that attacked the elves, Turgon could not stop thinking about his prophetic dreams, and he became worried and even more desperate to have his city built. So at that time, he gathered together some of his most trusted men and took them to the hidden path. He set up a watch around the path so that no one would find it and it would be guarded. And then he had his men tasked with starting to build the city. The power of Ulmo also helped protect this place as he imbued the stream on the way in with his magic. While this was happening, no one knew except for the men that were there and Turgon. He returned once again to Vinyamar and it was all kept a secret. It took 52 years to complete. And once it was established, the city was given the name Ondolinde in Quenya, meaning the rock of music and water, because there were great fountains built in the city. But as I will describe in the next video, not a lot of elves spoke Quenya anymore. It was the language of the High Elves, the Noldor. In public, everyone spoke Sindar, and in Sindar, the city was given the name Gondolin, meaning the hidden rock. Now that the city was completed, Turgon started to move his people to the hidden entrance. People traveled in small groups, families at a time, and everything was done under secrecy. And as well as his own people, he sent word to those living in his father's realm, and a third of the people who lived in Hithlum or Dorlomen with his father and brother also decided to make the journey to Gondolin. So it was a massive number of elves that moved from the western part of Beleriand to Gondolin, and not even Fingolfin knew where the city was. Finally, it came time for Turgon and his immediate family to travel. He had been living with his sister, Aredhel, and his daughter, Idril, and now it was their turn to finally go. They were the last ones. However, before he left, Ulmo came to him again. Ulmo told Turgon that his power would help keep Gondolin hidden and that no one would be able to find it against the king's will. Gondolin would also be the longest standing realm against the dark forces of Morgoth. It would last longer than any other great city of the Eldar. The Eldar meaning, in this case, the Noldor, the light elves. But he also warned Turgon that Turgon should not love the work of thy hands and the devices of thy heart too much, because the true hope of the Noldor lieth in the west and cometh from the sea. Turgon was still under the dark prophecy, the fate of the doom of the Noldor, and this is because of what they had done in Valinor. As I mentioned earlier, stuff went down. Part of this included a mass slaughter of a group of elves called the Teleri. These elves had been attacked first by Feanor and his sons, who were the uncle and cousins of Turgon, but Turgon, Finrod, Fingolfin, all of them had also come upon the scene and been actively involved in the kinslaying. And even if they hadn't been, any of the elves who were there and then chose to still come into Middle-earth and not go back and repent, they were all put under this dark fate. And so, obviously that includes Turgon. Ulmo reminded him that there was no way for him to escape this. Because of this, one day, Gondolin would also fall into peril, that there would be a treasonous betrayal, and then his elves and his city would be in peril of fire. But there was hope, because as Ulmo tells Turgon, Turgon will know when it is time to leave the city, when they are in danger, because someone will come to warn him. From him, beyond ruin and fire, hope shall be born for elves and men. Then Ulmo tells Turgon he will recognize the messenger, the one who has come to warn him of peril, because Turgon had to leave a specific set of armor and a sword behind in Vinyamar. Sometime in the future, this messenger would find this armor and this sword and would appear in Gondolin. That was Turgon's signal. Now, treachery is afoot, bad things are coming, fire's on its way, time to evacuate. That's why he couldn't love Gondolin too much. He could not escape the dark fate. He would have to leave it behind. And with this warning, Turgon did as he was told, took his family, and they left for Gondolin. Behind him, the gates were closed. It was his law that no one could know the hidden way into Gondolin and be permitted to leave the city. It was for their protection, but it also kind of made it a very beautiful cage. In Gondolin, the people were just thriving. They grew in abundance. They mined the surrounding areas and continued to create great works of beauty and craft. And in time, the city was almost as beautiful as Tirion itself. High and white were its walls, and smooth its stairs, and tall and strong was the tower of the king. There shining fountains played, and in the courts of Turgon stood images of the trees of old, which Turgon himself wrought with elven craft. And these trees are a reference to the trees of Valinor that had unfortunately long been dead by the hand of Morgoth and a giant spider monster, Ungoliant, who will come up again a little bit later. But despite the general splendor of Gondolin, it was said that the greatest gem in this city, the most beautiful thing, was Aredhel, Turgon's daughter. She that was called Celebrindle, the Silverfoot, whose hair was of the gold of Lorelin before the coming of Melkor. Lorelin being the golden tree. And this is because her mother, who had unfortunately passed away during the crossing of the Helcaraxe, the grinding ice, which was a time of great torment to the Noldor, her mother had been of the Vanyar, whose coloring was golden, and they had all remained behind in Valinor. Aredhel was one of very few who had the blood of the Vanyar in Middle-earth. And so, for many years, Turgon was full of joy, and his city prospered. However, this peace did not last forever. 200 years after coming to Gondolin, Aredhel, Turgon's younger sister, started to chafe at the restrictions of being trapped within the encircling mountains. She wanted to leave. She desired to ride again in the wide lands and walk the forests, as had been her wont in Valinor. Aredhel had always loved to go out riding, especially with her close friends, the sons of Feanor, her half-cousins. And she just did not want to be trapped in any one particular place. Turgon, however, as his law, wasn't going to let her leave. And he had a feeling that if she did, something bad was going to happen to her. And then something bad was going to happen to him in turn. So for many years, he said no, until finally, he relented. He sent a trusted group of his own household to guard her and told her that she was going to go straight to their brother's place in Dor-lómin. But Aredhel wasn't happy about this. She was not happy at the idea of her brother dictating where she was going to go and how she was going to live. She said, "You don't have to send a group with me. I can go on my own." But he reassured her that he trusted her deeply. He knew that she would not betray him and show anyone how to get to Gondolin. That was the only reason he was letting her leave in the first place. And so, understanding this, Aredhel agreed. She took the escort, and they left Gondolin. The group traveled out the hidden passage and down further to the south. Once they reached the ford of Brithiach, Aredhel stopped and said, actually, I'm not going to Dor-lómin. I'm not going to see my brother. I'm going to go visit my friends, the sons of Feanor. I want to visit them, to go out riding with them like we did back in the days of Valinor. You can either come with me and help protect me, or you can just let me go on my own. Of course, they chose to accompany her, and so they traveled further south, reaching the border of the forest of Doriath. Doriath was known as the Hidden Realm, and it was surrounded by a wall of enchantment. This was called the Girdle of Melian, Melian being the queen of Doriath, wife of King Thingol, king of the Sindar. No one could enter this forest unless Melian or Thingol allowed it. And as the guards in the forest told Aredhel, none of the Noldor were permitted to enter, except those that were directly blood related to Thingol, but that was a different side of the family. Aredhel was not permitted. If she wanted to get to the marches of Beleriand, where the sons of Fëanor lived, she was going to have to go around the forest, which either meant she was going to have to go a really long way around to the south, or the faster route was to go between the northern border of Doriath and the Mountains of Terror, through what is essentially the Valley of Death. And Aredhel decided, okay, if that is the fastest way, let's go. And her group took the path between the border of Doriath and Ered Gorgoroth. And as they drew nearer to the evil region of Nan Dangorthab, the riders became enmeshed in shadows, and Aredhel strayed from her companions and was lost. Of course they searched for her, but they could not find her, and they didn't have long to look before the inhabitants of this forest came after them. In this valley lived the spawn of Ungoliant, as I mentioned earlier, a monstrous spider creature who had come to that forest hundreds of years ago and had left behind a bunch of nasty little spiderlings that could weave great webs of darkness and shadow. These were the webs that got them ensnared in the first place, and once the spiders attacked, the riders had to flee. They barely made it out alive. And unfortunately, when they returned to Gondolin, they had to bring word that Aredhel had been lost. Likely, she was dead. Turgon was full of grief and anger, and a great sorrow came upon Gondolin. Aredhel, however, being one of the brave and mighty Noldor, had made it through the forest on her own. She actually managed to get all the way through to the other side and came out at her destination. She came out in the area of Himlad. This was a part of Beleriand that was controlled by the sons of Fëanor named Celegorm and Curufin. Unfortunately, however, even after getting through the woods, Aredhel could not catch a break. When she arrived in Himlad, they were not there. Celegorm and Curufin were out visiting their brother Caranthir further to the east. At the urging of the servants, she decided to just stay and wait for them to return. But a year passed and they still hadn't come back. She got bored. She began taking daily rides further and further away from their home. And one day, she reached the borders of a very dark patch of forest. This was the forest of Nan Elmoth. Thousands of years ago, when the elves had made their very first journey across Middle-earth, across the continent, this had been the place that King Thingol and Queen Melian met. And at that time, the forest was beautiful and the trees were young and new. Now the trees of Nan Elmoth were the tallest and darkest in all Beleriand, and there the sun never came. In this forest for many years had lived the elf Eöl, and he was known as the Dark Elf. He was actually one of the kin of King Thingol, but he had never really fit in Doriath. When the Girdle of Melian was set to close off the forest and potentially trap him inside, Eöl had chosen to leave Doriath and had come to the forest of Nan Elmoth. Now in that time, there were two ways that dwarfs had actually come into Beleriand, and one of these roads had been very close to Nan Elmoth. And because of this, Eöl met and befriended the dwarves. He was actually, at this time, the closest of any of the elves to the dwarves. They were friendly. They invited him to their cities of Nogrod and Belagost. They shared with him great knowledge of smithing, and in time he became a phenomenally talented metalworker. He lived in Nan Elmoth with his house, a few servants, and his forge, and he was at this home when Aredhel happened to come across the forest. As a very powerful elf, Eowl's eyes were able to pierce the darkness and the gloom of the trees of Nan Elmoth. He was able to see the brightness of her white dress, and this interested him, so he went out to take a look. Very fair she seemed to him, and he desired her. And he set his enchantments about her, so she could not find the ways out, but drew ever nearer to his dwelling in the depths of the wood. But yeah, he trapped her. He did. And she got tired eventually of trying to find her way out of the forest and came across his home. Hoping to get help, she stopped, she knocked, and he invited her inside. But he didn't help her find the way out. He, in fact, as Tolkien tells us, took her to wife. All I'll say is, because I've recorded this more than once and I need to stop with my commentary about Eowl, all I'll say is Aredhel 1000% did not go into that forest looking for a husband. But we do know that elves' marriage is a spiritual union, a connection in a way that, from at least what I understand, is not possible through brute force alone. Plus, Tolkien tells us that Aredhel was not wholly unwilling, and her life in Nan Elmoth was not completely hateful, which is the bare minimum, I guess, to not despise everything about your husband and your home. I don't like it. That's all I'll say. Let's move on. Aredhel did spend time that she enjoyed with Eowl, seeing the stars and the beauty of the forest at night. But we have to remember that Aredhel loved open spaces and to explore and to be free. But Eowl commanded her to shun the sunlight and to never see any of the Noldor, her family, again. In time, they had a son, and in secret, Aredhel named him Loman, meaning child of the twilight. Interestingly, Eowl actually waited 12 years before naming his son, and he gave his son the name Maeglin, which is what we will refer to him by. That's what everyone refers to him by, Maeglin. Maeglin grew up looking a lot like his mother, like the Noldor. He had pale skin and dark hair and eyes. But although he looked like his mother, he had the temperament of his gloomy, kind of sourpuss father. He was a man of very, very, very few words. He did not talk a lot, but when he did choose to speak, he had a great mastery of the ability to convince and persuade others. He reminds me actually a lot of Feanor in the way that his words are powerful when he chose to use them. As he grew up, Eowl also took him often to visit the dwarves, and because of this, Maeglin also grew as a very skilled smith and became completely proficient in metalwork. Despite all the time he spent with his father, he loved his mother more, and he enjoyed spending time with her more. Aredhel would tell Maeglin stories of her past, of her childhood growing up in Valinor, and of all the difficulties of what happened there in the crossing and all that had befallen in Middle-earth, including the beauty and splendor of her home in Gondolin. And Maeglin would listen with fascination, desiring to see the world that she described. He had grown up entirely in the dark forests and traveling by night to the dark mountains. He had never seen anything like what she was telling him, and he was particularly interested in Gondolin, of the realm of his uncle, and interested by the fact that his uncle had no heir. He only had a daughter, and as we know, his wife, Elenwe, had died. In telling these stories, Aredhel also began to miss her home. She missed the beauty and the freedom of Gondolin, and even though she knew why she had left and the feelings that she had while she was there, she recognized the amazing life that she'd had, and she wanted to be back there with her family. And it was because of these stories that the first real problems started in the family. Maeglin began asking how to get to Gondolin, and Aredhel, still very loyal to her brother, refused to tell him the way. She kept the secret even from her own son. And Maeglin hoped that if he waited long enough, she might slip up and give it away. And then he tried reading from her unguarded mind, implying he was trying to manipulate or, against her will, get the information from his mother's mind. So instead, Maeglin decided that he wanted to go visit the sons of Feanor. He knew that they were his blood relations and his mother's close friends. So he told his father, and as we might expect, Eöl did not react well. "You are the house of Eöl, Maeglin, my son," he said, "and not of the Golatrim. All this is the land of the Teleri, and I will not deal, nor have my son deal with the slayers of our kin, the invaders and usurpers of our homes. In this you shall obey me, or I will set you in bonds." No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to comment. It's interesting here that Eöl uses the word Teleri and not Sindar. As I mentioned earlier, the Teleri are a group of elves from Valinor. The Teleri had been one of the groups that traveled, along with the Noldor, across the land and into Valinor. But a large number of them had actually stayed behind. And in time, this group was known as the Sindar. So by using the word Teleri instead of Sindar, it makes me wonder if he was one of the very first elves, one of the ones that actually made that original journey thousands and thousands of years ago. It definitely leads me to believe that he is a very old elf. And either Aredhel told him of the kinslaying, or he had heard the rumors that were circulating in Beleriand. Either way, he knew what had happened. He knew that the Noldor had attacked and killed the Teleri, and he 100% held them all responsible for it. He would rather lock his son in chains than allow him to see that side of the family. Maeglin did not respond, as he often didn't. But from that moment onward, Eöl did not trust his son. Now it came to be midsummer, and as they always did, the dwarves were holding a festival and a feast in Nogrod, and as they often did, they invited Eöl. When he left, Maeglin decided that this was the perfect time. He went to his mother and told her, "Father's going to be gone for days. This is our chance. We need to go. We need to escape now." Aredhel, who felt very similarly to her son, was overcome with pride at seeing just his desire to help her and to be brave, and so she agreed. They told the servants that they were going to visit the sons of Feanor. Eöl was not there to stop them. They took horses and rode off. Unfortunately, however, they didn't have nearly as much of a head start as they thought they would. Not 2 days later, Eöl returned, and he was enraged to hear that they had gone. Immediately, Eöl set out after them, up towards the land of Himlad. Now, in Himlad, there were elves watching the ford of Aros, which Aredhel and Maeglin crossed, and these guards sent word back to Celegorm and Curufin of what they saw. Curious, and thinking something was going on, Curufin decided to go investigate, and it just so happened that he got there the same time Eöl was trying to sneak by. So the guards of Curufin caught Eöl, brought them to their master. Both Curufin and Eöl were not happy to see one another. Eöl knew the Noldor did not like him, and we know very well he did not like the Noldor. And so Curufin demanded to know what he was doing in Himlad. And Eöl responded, "Well, my wife and my son, they told my servants they would be here, and I've come to stay with them and to visit you, my dear, dear family." This did not impress Curufin. He told Eöl that either he was lying or he had been lied to, and to not refer to him as family. "Do not flaunt the title of your wife before me, for those who steal the daughters of the Noldor and wed them without gift or leave do not gain kinship with their kin." There are many reasons to not like Curufin, but this is a beautiful moment. That Eorl has to remain polite and just ask that he be let go to search for his wife and child. And Curufin responds, fine, you can go, but I have to tell you, I have a feeling that if you go after them and they don't want you anymore, you're not going to come back. And he lets Eorl go. Eorl immediately rushes off, but he is full of rage. He realizes now that Aredhel and Maeglin are trying to get away from him, and they must be going back to Gondolin. Now, unfortunately, Eorl's horse was faster than that of Aredhel and Maeglin, and he was able to catch up. Despite this, however, they came so close to getting away. They were almost out of his reach, but their horses neighed loudly, and his horse was close enough to hear it. His horse brought him close enough that he was able to see the glowing white of Aredhel's dress. And so he was able to stalk them to the hidden realm and find the path. Aredhel and Maeglin made it through, got to the gate, and were welcomed with joy. Everyone was so happy to see them. They thought Aredhel was gone, and they didn't know Maeglin existed. And so Aredhel and Maeglin were brought up to Gondolin, presented to Turgon, and he was just overjoyed to see them. He promised Maeglin the highest honors and titles, and he welcomed them with open arms. Maeglin himself was a little overwhelmed by everything. Remember the way he grew up? The splendor of Gondolin and just the world, really, but especially Gondolin, was a lot. But to him, there was something even more fantastic than the city, and that was Idril. When he saw her, she seemed so bright and full of light that it almost seemed like the entire city took its light from her. She was spectacular, and upon finding out how closely they were related, his feelings did not change. But back to Eorl. He had, of course, been stopped by the guards and taken captive. He was putting up a heck of a fight, but he was captive. The guards then went to the city and declared to Turgon that there was a stranger at the gates, a stranger that was claiming to be Aredhel's husband. When they described him, Aredhel confirmed it. She was dismayed that he had found the way, that he had followed her. She thought she had gotten away safely, but she couldn't deny that it was him, and so he was brought before the king. For his part, Turgon welcomed Eorl with open arms, as he had Maeglin. He told him that he was happy to have this new family here, and that Eorl was welcome to stay with his wife and son in Gondolin. He didn't treat him with the disrespect that Curufin had. Even though maybe he should have, because the way he responded was, well, it was about right for him. Upon hearing that he was not allowed to leave the city despite this lovely welcome, Eorl snapped. He yelled at Turgon that he did not follow the rules of this king, because this king, being Turgon, had no right to this land. This was the land of the Teleri. The Noldor were nothing but murderers who had come in and taken it, and they did not deserve it. They only brought more pain and suffering and death upon the people that lived there. He said that he was only in Gondolin to take back what was his, as if his family were property that he had come to collect, and that Eorl did not care about Turgon's laws, about his rules. He had no interest in Gondolin or its secrets. He just came to get his property and leave. And then he took it one step further. Yet if in Aredhel, your sister, you have some claim, then let her remain. Let the bird go back to the cage, where she will soon sicken again, as she sickened before. But not so, Maeglin. My son you will not withhold from me. Turgon was furious, not just because of the way that his sister had been callously referred to, but just because of the gall of Eorl to march into Turgon's kingdom and to speak this way. He reminded Eorl that it was only because of the Noldor that Eöl was still alive as a free elf, that the Noldor had been the one that defended the lands around Nan Elmoth. Without them, Eöl would have been a slave in the pits of Angband by now. And he told him that he had two choices. That was it. There are no debates, there are no arguments. You stay, and you be grateful, or you die. Now Eöl was quiet for a little while, and Aredhel became afraid, because she knew that he was dangerous. But all of a sudden, just like how Captain jumped up on my table, Eöl sprung into action. He yelled that he would choose the second option. He would choose death. And not only for himself, he would make this choice for his son. He pulled a spear out of his cloak, which no one checked him for weapons. He pulled a spear, a javelin, out of his cloak and threw it straight at his son. But in the last moment, Aredhel dove in front of him and took the blow to her shoulder. Eöl was, of course, tackled immediately, dragged away in chains, and Aredhel was taken, badly injured, to rest. Eöl was to be judged in the morning by Turgon, and both Aredhel and Idril managed to convince him to be merciful. And maybe he would have been, but unfortunately, the tip of the spear that had pierced Aredhel's shoulder was poisoned, and no one figured it out until it was too late. That very night, Aredhel, who had survived thousands of years of life, had seen Valinor, endured the crossing, seen the devastation upon Middle-earth, endured so much pain, died, saving her son from her husband. And that morning, there was no mercy for Eöl. Turgon immediately declared that he was to be executed. And in Gondolin, that meant being thrown from the high walls of the northern side of the city into a precipice that ran deep alongside the hill. And they were accompanied by Maeglin, who, again, was silent, just as he had been when his father tried to kill him. Just before he was thrown to his death, Eöl pulled back and yelled to Maeglin that Maeglin had betrayed him, betrayed his father, and that he sentenced his son to meet the same fate. And then Eöl was thrown from the walls. Again, Maeglin said nothing. And from that moment, Idril did not trust him. There was something about his reaction, or lack thereof, that made her know something was deeply wrong inside Maeglin. Despite this, however, after the death of his parents, Maeglin prospered in Gondolin. He had great favor from the king. He could learn and pick up things very quickly and had a great deal of knowledge and skill to share with the people. He was beloved by many and began to amass both power and influence. People looked to him for guidance and for wisdom and teaching. Despite this, however, Maeglin was not happy. And that was because the only thing that he truly wanted, he could not have. And that, once again, was Idril, his first cousin. Elves did not marry family that was that closely related. I mean, they married people they were related to all the time because there was a very small pool to start with, but first cousins did not happen. And before Maeglin, there hadn't really been an issue. He kept his feelings hidden, but Idril, she knew. She saw the way he watched her, and she felt like this desire that he had was just further proof that there was something strange and wrong in him. In time, his love turned to a great darkness within him, and he just poured all of his attention, all of his time into amassing more and more wealth and influence. Thus it was in Gondolin, and amid all the bliss of that realm, while its glory lasted, a dark seed of evil was sown. And that was the tragedy of Aredhel and the founding of Gondolin. I hope you enjoyed the story. Again, please let me know what you think, if I could change up the way that I'm giving the background, or if this was okay. And I will be going to every other week starting this week. If you enjoy fairy tales, other folk tales, and mythologies, please take a look at my channel, Folksy Tales. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today, and I will see you next time.